Have you ever noticed how some wounds never quite heal? How you can forgive a stranger's cruelty, overlook a friend's mistake, even laugh off an enemy's attack, but when someone you trusted completely shatters that trust, something inside you dies. They don't just hurt you. They don't just disappoint you. They fundamentally alter your relationship with reality itself. And suddenly, you realize that the pain isn't really about what they did. It's about what they revealed. About what you now know you can never unknow. Friedrich Nietzsche captured this perfectly. I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that from now on I can't believe you. That's where the real devastation lies. When betrayal strikes, most people think the pain comes from the specific act, the lie, the affair, the broken promise. But that's just the surface. The real psychological earthquake happens much deeper. You see, betrayal doesn't just break trust. It shatters your entire framework for understanding the world. You have been conditioned to believe that if you give your loyalty, your vulnerability, your authentic self to someone, they will honor that gift. But here's what no one tells you about the psychology of betrayal. It's not really about what they did to you. It's about what they revealed about the fundamental nature of human connection. And that revelation is terrifying. Carl Jung understood this when he wrote about the collective unconscious and our deepest archetypal fears. Betrayal triggers our most primitive terror, that we are ultimately alone. That connection is an illusion, that the very ground we stand on can collapse without warning. When someone betrays you, they're not just breaking a promise, they're confirming your deepest, most hidden fear that maybe, just maybe, love isn't real. But here's the cruel twist. The people who can betray you most deeply are precisely the ones you trusted most completely. Your mother, your partner, your closest friend, your business partner. These are the people who have access to your soft spots, your vulnerabilities, your unguarded moments. And when they use that access against you, it's not just a betrayal of your relationship. It's a betrayal of your entire belief system. Do you know why betrayal from strangers barely scratches the surface? Because you never invested them with the power to define your reality. But when someone close to you betrays you, they're not just hurting you, they're rewriting your past. Suddenly, every memory becomes questionable. Every shared moment becomes suspect. Was any of it real? Did they ever truly care? Were you living in a fantasy while they were playing a game? This is why betrayal creates a unique form of psychological trauma that Jung called soul murder. Because when someone you trust completely reveals themselves to be fundamentally different from who you thought they were, you don't just lose them, you lose your faith in your own judgment. You lose your ability to trust your perceptions. You lose your confidence in your capacity to truly know another human being. And here's the darkest part. Betrayal always comes wrapped in intimacy. The deeper the connection, the more devastating the betrayal. Because betrayal requires proximity. It requires access. It requires that you lower your guard, open your heart, and make yourself vulnerable. The very qualities that make love possible, trust, vulnerability, openness, are the same qualities that make betrayal possible. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He understood that betrayal is so painful precisely because it reveals the fragility of all human connections. When someone betrays you, they're showing you something you desperately didn't want to see, that even the people closest to you are capable of treating you as expendable, as a means to an end, as less important than their own desires or fears. But most people don't understand the deeper mechanism at work here. They think the solution is to trust less, to guard themselves more carefully, to become more cynical. But that's not healing from betrayal. That's just creating a different kind of prison. Because when you close your heart to protect yourself from betrayal, you also close it to authentic connection. You solve the problem of betrayal by eliminating the possibility of real love. And that's exactly what we need to talk about next. Because Jung discovered something profound about betrayal that most people miss entirely. Something that changes everything about how you understand not just betrayal, but the very nature of human relationships. Something that can transform your deepest wound into your greatest wisdom. If this resonates with something you've experienced, hit the subscribe button, because what we're about to explore will challenge everything you think you know about trust, love, and the human heart. The truth about betrayal that nobody wants to face is this: we participate in our own betrayals long before they happen. And I don't mean you deserve it. I don't mean you asked for it. What I mean is something far more subtle and far more important for your healing. Carl Jung spent his life studying what he called the shadow, those parts of ourselves and others that we refuse to see. And here's what he discovered. We often place people in our lives based not on who they actually are, but on who we need them to be. We project onto them qualities they never possessed, intentions they never had, depths they never contained. And when reality finally breaks through our projections, we call it betrayal. But was it really betrayal, or was it the inevitable collapse of an illusion? Think about the last time someone betrayed you. Really think. Were there signs you ignored? Red flags you rationalized away? Inconsistencies you explained away because you wanted so desperately to believe in the story you had created about them? Jung called this participation mystique. The unconscious merging of your inner world with another person, where you lose track of where you end and they begin. Most people live their entire lives in relationships with projections, not people. They fall in love with potential, not reality. They trust their fantasies about someone rather than the evidence of their actions. And then, when that person inevitably reveals their true nature, which was always there, always visible to anyone willing to see, they feel betrayed. But here's where it gets really uncomfortable. Sometimes what we call betrayal is actually the other person finally being honest about who they've always been. Sometimes betrayal is just the moment when someone stops performing the role you cast them in and starts being themselves. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote about the will to power, the fundamental drive in all humans to assert their own interests, their own needs, their own survival above all else. He wasn't being cynical. He was being realistic. Every person you trust is ultimately loyal to themselves first. And if you build relationships based on the fantasy that they will consistently choose you over themselves, you're setting yourself up for inevitable disappointment. This doesn't mean love isn't real. It means love requires seeing people as they actually are, not as you need them to be. Real love doesn't require someone to betray themselves for you. Real love doesn't demand that someone be other than they are to deserve your affection. But most of us never learned this. We were taught to love conditionally, to give our hearts only to those who promise to never hurt us, never disappoint us, never choose themselves over us. And this creates what Jung called a psychological inflation. We begin to believe we deserve a kind of loyalty that doesn't exist in nature, a kind of devotion that requires the other person to fundamentally deny their own humanity. And here's the cruelest irony. The more desperately you need someone to never betray you, the more likely they are to do exactly that. Because your neediness, your clinging, your attempt to control their loyalty through guilt or manipulation or emotional dependency, all of this creates exactly the kind of suffocating dynamic that makes betrayal feel like freedom to them. Do you know why betrayal hurts so much more than abandonment? Because abandonment at least has the decency to be honest. When someone leaves, they're saying, "This isn't working for me." When someone betrays you, they're saying, "I want to keep you around, but I also want to violate the terms of our connection." Betrayal is dishonesty in service of having it both ways. Jung discovered that most betrayals happen not because people are inherently evil, but because they're inherently conflicted. They want security and freedom. They want stability and excitement. They want your love and someone else's attention. They want to be good and they want to be free. And rather than face this conflict honestly, rather than admit their divided desires, they choose deception. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The person who betrays you is also betraying themselves. They're choosing short-term gratification over long-term integrity. They're choosing the illusion of having everything over the reality of choosing what matters most. They're trading their own wholeness for temporary convenience. And this is why betrayal creates such complex emotions. Part of you wants to hate them. Part of you wants to save them. Part of you wants revenge. Part of you wants reconciliation. Because on some level, you recognize that the person who betrayed you is also a victim of their own inability to choose, their own failure to integrate their conflicted desires, their own refusal to grow up and take responsibility for the complexity of their own heart. This recognition doesn't make the betrayal hurt less, but it does change the nature of the pain. Instead of feeling like a victim of someone else's cruelty, you begin to see yourself as someone who got caught in the crossfire of another person's internal war. And that changes everything about how you heal from it. But healing from betrayal isn't just about understanding the betrayer. It's about understanding something much more important. What betrayal reveals about your own relationship with trust, with love, with your deepest fears about human connection. And that's exactly what we need to explore next. Because Jung discovered that betrayal, properly understood, isn't just a wound, it's an initiation. An invitation to develop a completely different kind of trust, a more mature, more realistic, more sustainable way of loving that doesn't require the other person to be anything other than gloriously, imperfectly, unpredictably human. The path through betrayal isn't forgiveness, it's not revenge, it's not closure, it's something far more radical. It's the complete reconstruction of how you understand love, trust, and human nature. And this reconstruction begins with a single, terrifying question. What if betrayal isn't the opposite of love, but one of its inevitable consequences? Carl Jung believed that every psychological wound contains within it the seeds of its own healing. But here's the catch. You can only access those seeds by going deeper into the wound, not by trying to escape from it. Most people handle betrayal by either hardening their hearts or falling into victim consciousness. Both responses keep you trapped in the wound rather than transformed by it. The transformation begins when you stop asking, "How could they do this to me?" and start asking, "What was I refusing to see?" This isn't about self-blame. This is about self-awareness. Because the truth is, betrayal almost always reveals blind spots in your own perception, places where your need for security overrode your capacity for truth. Think about it. When someone betrays you, they're usually doing something they've always been capable of doing. The capacity was always there, the willingness was always there. What changed wasn't them. What changed was the circumstances that finally triggered their choice to act on that capacity. Jung called this developing psychological eyes, the ability to see people not as you need them to be, but as they actually are. This doesn't make you cynical. It makes you wise. Cynicism says, everyone will hurt you, so trust no one. Wisdom says, everyone is human, so trust appropriately. But what does it mean to trust appropriately? It means understanding that trust isn't binary. It's not either complete trust or no trust at all. Trust is contextual, graduated, and constantly evolving based on evidence. You can trust someone to be kind while acknowledging they might not be reliable. You can trust someone's good intentions while recognizing their poor judgment. You can trust someone's love while accepting their limitations. The transformation begins when you realize that the people who betrayed you didn't stop being worthy of love. They simply revealed that they were never worthy of the specific kind of trust you had placed in them. And that's not their failure. That's information. Information you can use to love them more appropriately and protect yourself more intelligently. But here's where it gets really challenging. Transforming betrayal into wisdom requires you to take responsibility for your part in the dynamic without taking responsibility for their choices. This is a razor-thin line to walk. You must own your projections, your blind spots, your refusal to see warning signs, your tendency to love potential rather than reality. But you must not own their decision to deceive, to cheat, to break promises, to violate agreements. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote about amor fati, love of fate. He wasn't suggesting that you should be grateful for betrayal or that everything happens for a reason. He was suggesting that you can choose to extract value from every experience, no matter how painful, by using it as raw material for becoming wiser, stronger, more authentic. This is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes crucial. Individuation is the process of becoming whole, of integrating all parts of yourself, including the parts that have been wounded, the parts that have been naive, the parts that have participated in their own betrayal. It's about becoming someone who can love fully without losing yourself, who can trust wisely without becoming cynical. The transformation path requires you to develop what I call adult love. Love that doesn't require the other person to be perfect. Love that can coexist with disappointment. Love that doesn't need guarantees to be genuine. Adult love says, I love you and I see you clearly. I love you and I accept that you might hurt me. I love you and I take responsibility for protecting myself. This is radically different from the conditional love most of us learned as children. Love that says, I will love you if you never disappoint me, if you always choose me, if you never reveal any darkness or complexity or competing desires. That kind of love isn't actually love at all. It's a contract. It's emotional insurance. It's an attempt to control another person's heart through your own neediness. But transforming betrayal into wisdom also requires you to grieve. Not just the relationship you lost, but the innocence you lost, the fantasy you lost, the naive belief that if you're good enough, loyal enough, loving enough, you can somehow guarantee that others will never hurt you. This grief is necessary because you can't build adult relationships on childhood fantasies about love. Jung understood that every initiation requires a death, the death of who you were before. Betrayal kills the part of you that believed in perfect trust, unconditional loyalty, and guaranteed safety in love. And this death is painful, but it's also necessary. Because the part of you that dies in betrayal is the part that was never sustainable anyway. What emerges from this death is someone who can love without controlling, trust without grasping, commit without losing themselves. Someone who understands that the goal isn't to find someone who will never hurt you. The goal is to become someone who can handle being hurt without losing their capacity for love. This transformation also requires you to examine your own capacity for betrayal. Because Jung knew that we are all capable of the things we judge most harshly in others. Part of healing from betrayal is acknowledging the ways you might have betrayed others, their trust, their expectations, their vulnerabilities. Not to create false equivalencies, but to develop compassion for the complexity of human nature. When you can look at the person who betrayed you and see not a monster, but a fellow human being struggling with their own conflicts, their own fears, their own limitations, you've achieved something profound. You've moved from victim consciousness to witness consciousness. You've transformed your wound into wisdom. But this transformation isn't just internal. It changes how you show up in relationships. You become someone who can be intimate without being possessive, vulnerable without being naive, loving without being desperate. You develop what Jung called conscious relationship. Relationship based on seeing and accepting reality rather than projecting fantasies. And here's the most beautiful part. When you transform betrayal into wisdom, You become someone who is almost impossible to truly betray again. Not because you don't trust, but because you trust appropriately. Not because you don't love, but because you love wisely. Not because you're hard-hearted, but because you're clear-sighted. This is the rebirth that Jung talked about, the emergence of a self that has been tested by fire and emerged not burned, but forged into something stronger, clearer, more authentic. Someone who understands that love doesn't require safety, that trust doesn't require guarantees, that intimacy doesn't require control. But what does life actually look like after this transformation? What changes when you've successfully alchemized betrayal into wisdom? That's what we need to explore in our final section, because the goal isn't just to survive betrayal. It's to use it as a doorway into a completely different way of being human. When you emerge from the fire of betrayal transformed rather than just scarred, something remarkable happens. You become someone who cannot be controlled through your fears about being hurt again. You develop what Jung called psychological immunity. Not immunity to pain, but immunity to the kind of unconscious patterns that made you vulnerable to betrayal in the first place. The first thing you notice is how differently you move through relationships. You're no longer scanning constantly for signs of betrayal, not because you trust blindly, but because you trust yourself to handle whatever comes. You've learned that betrayal won't kill you, it will teach you. This knowledge creates a kind of fearless love, love that doesn't need reassurance, love that doesn't require the other person to be anything other than human. People notice this change in you immediately. You become magnetic in a completely different way, not because you're trying to attract anyone, but because you're no longer repelling people with desperation, neediness, or the suffocating energy of someone who needs love to feel okay about themselves. You love from overflow, not from emptiness. Your relationships become cleaner, more honest, more sustainable. You find yourself attracted to people who can handle your truth and repelled by people who need you to be smaller than you are. You naturally gravitate toward other people who have done their own psychological work, who understand that love is not possession and commitment is not control. But perhaps the most profound change is this. You stop taking other people's choices personally. When someone lies to you, disappoints you, or even leaves you, you don't interpret it as a statement about your worth. You understand that people's choices are always about them, their fears, their limitations, their capacity for growth, their stage of development. This doesn't make their choices okay, but it does free you from the prison of believing that other people's behavior defines your value. You also develop what Nietzsche called hardness. Not cruelty, but the ability to face reality without flinching, to see people clearly without needing them to be different, to love without illusions. This hardness is actually a form of compassion because it allows you to love people as they are, rather than torturing them with your need for them to be who they're not. The person you become after integrating betrayal is someone who can be hurt but not broken, disappointed but not destroyed, alone but not lonely. You've learned that your wholeness doesn't depend on another person's choices. Your peace doesn't require their approval. Your love doesn't need their reciprocation to be real. This is the gift hidden inside every betrayal, the opportunity to become someone who loves freely because they're free, who trusts wisely because they've been tested, who commits fully because they're choosing from strength rather than neediness. Jung understood that this kind of psychological maturity can only come through suffering consciously engaged with. Betrayal isn't something that happens to you. It's something that happens through you, transforming you into someone capable of a deeper, more authentic way of being human. Today, we learned from Nietzsche that the pain of betrayal isn't really about being lied to. It's about losing our faith in our ability to truly know another person. And from Jung, we learned that this loss of innocence, painful as it is, can become the foundation for a more mature, more sustainable way of loving. When we stop trying to control others through our need for safety and start loving from our own wholeness, betrayal transforms from our greatest wound into our greatest teacher. If these insights sparked a moment of recognition for you, hit the like button to share this wisdom with others who might need to hear it. Subscribe to join our community, where we dive deeper into life-changing psychological truths every week. Together, we're exploring ideas that don't just inform the mind, but transform how we show up in the world. Let me know in the comments, have you experienced a betrayal that ultimately became a doorway to deeper wisdom? What did it teach you about love, trust, and your own strength? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Until we meet again, remember, your capacity to transform pain into wisdom is the most powerful tool you possess. Carry Jung's insight forward, that every wound contains its own healing, every betrayal its own liberation. The person who emerges from betrayal consciously is someone who can love more deeply precisely because they've learned to love more wisely. And don't forget, keep watching our next video, where we'll explore another profound psychological truth that will challenge everything you think you know about human nature. See you there.